Good afternoon all for the post-lunch session. We are very happy to have Dr. Suprabhat Karak. Dr. Suprabhat Karak, brief about Dr. Suprabhat Karak. He received his master degree as well as PhD degree from Department of Physics, IIT Kharagpur, India. He has then worked as a EFRC postdoctoral fellow at University of Massachusetts, USA, and JSPS fellow at Nagawa University, Japan, for several years. Since October 2016, Dr. Karak has been a part of the Center for Energy Studies, IIT Delhi, as an assistant professor. His research involved on organic electronics, organic and hybrid semiconductors for photovoltaic and photo detection application, fabrication and characterization of organic single crystal fundamental photo physics, charge transport, nanostructures, and thin film-based photovoltaic devices. A lot of things he has done. He has received a lot of awards, honors, and recognition. A few of them is visiting faculty at Nagawa University, Japan, Early Career Research Award from ACRB, JSPA Foreign Research Award from Japan, EFRC Foreign Research Fellowship from USA, Gold Medal for First Class Passed in BSc from Vidyasagar University, Gold Medal in Physics from BSc from same university. He has published a lot of papers in several international journals. With this short biography, I'd like to request Dr. Karak to take the session and give his valuable work with the participants. Dr. Karak, please.
Thank you, Dr. Panda. Nice introduction. So anyway, so I see 14, 15 students are here, right?
Not students, or most of them faculties are there.
Okay.
Participants are there.
Participants.
They will join shortly. Maybe it will go up 35 or 36.
Oh. Okay. So should we start now or wait for a couple of minutes?
I think we can start because we have short of time. No? The time limit is there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So basically, I'm going to talk about the fundamentals of photovoltaics, and you see nowadays, wherever you go in the field of energy, people are talking about only renewables and solars, green energy, green technology, all these things, right? So for last 4 or 5 years, those things have been picked up really a lot. So I'll basically summarize the solar part here. 3 sessions I have designed. Today's session, basically, I will talk about the fundamentals of what these solar cells are and what they are made of, and how the things we can control and understanding of the things, right? Before that, we cannot really jump into the technology and think of something out of the box for future, right? So you have to understand the existing problems and then the possibilities that we have and the fundamental science behind it, and then we can think about emerging technologies and materials, right? So basically, I will take 3 sessions today. I will cover most of the fundamental things, so it will require a lot of semiconductor things and a little bit of mathematics also, all these things. So please bear with me, but I will try to keep everything as dilute as possible by neglecting those things and mostly emphasizing on the physics part and the application part. And next 2 sessions, I will talk about, once we understand the limitations, I will talk about how to go beyond that limitations in terms of technology, in terms of new materials and cost effective things that we can bring on the table, right? So one by one, I'll discuss everything. So basically, I will sum up this field of solar cells and all these things, right? So let me go ahead. So today's talk will basically introduce the fundamental of solar photovoltaics, as I said. So basically, I will talk about the energy scenario of global things and why we are talking about solar, and then the current status of this technology. We are talking too much of solar, but in day-to-day life, we had hardly any utilization of solar, right? Still, we pay our bill to BCS and all this electricity and all these things, right? We are not paying bills to solar industry, right? So where these solars are getting stuck. And then the fundamentals and how we characterize in them in lab and then bring in the market. So all this aspect I will talk today. So this is 1.5 hour talk. So maybe in between I will give you some time to just get a break and interact with me, and then we'll resume again, right? Okay, so let us first give you the scenery, that what is energy and what purposes we need the energy. You see, the energy is required for everything. You cannot name 1 or 2 things where we don't need any kind of. Name transportation, you name it, industry, agriculture, household, office, even classroom and all. Everywhere we need technology, and mostly the energy dependent technology, right? And if you see, the most versatile type of energy that we require at the end of the day is the electricity. It does not matter how you are generating, but the end result always in demand is the electricity. Once you convert all form of energy into electricity, then you can basically run your machines and run your gadgets, right? So most versatile technology or energy requirement, that whatever you call, name it, transportation, industry, agriculture, household, office, wherever you want to apply, the versatile form is the electricity. So ultimately you have to generate electricity. And how historically we do that? Initially, if you go by the pre-industrial age and all these things, the first engine that came to help us was the steam engine, right? So steam engine, what we did, we burn some coal or something like that, and we create heat. Then we run some mechanical work using that heat, and then convert it to electricity. Then the second generation engine came is the internal combustion engine, right? So that engine, again, instead of coal, now we burn petroleum product like petrol, diesel, gas, natural gas, right? And then ultimately, end of the day, again we run the machine by converting those heat and other work and everything into electricity, right? So unfortunately or fortunately, until now, the basic way we utilize this energy and convert them into our preferable form of energy is still these two engine, steam and combustion. And unfortunately, the sources still remain the hero sources: coal, petroleum, gasoline, diesel, and all this, right? So this present era, if you summarize, are heavily dependent on fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, all these things, as I said, right? So here also you can see we can have nuclear, gravitational, wind, and all. Let me start that pointer. So whatever you see, ultimately we want to come here, the electrical. And once we have this electrical, we can use in many purposes, right? As I was saying. Now, what is the problem of this fossil fuels? Why everything is going so smoothly? Why we are talking about something else? Where is the need? We keep telling that no, we need to change to green energy and this and that, and the way we are dealing with the energy things, it's not going to survive for long. So, what are the problems? Problem is that daily life, if you see the population, the industrialization, whatever, is rapidly growing, right? Rapidly growing, and it is expected that it will expand even with higher percentage, right? So how much these fossil fuels we have? That is the burning question, right? Because if you see how we generate the fossil fuels, it takes like millions of years of pressure and heat under the earth crust to make some kilograms or some gallon of fossil fuels. But we are using it daily basis in a rapid fashion, right? So it is not going to survive for long. It is not infinitely available to us, first of all. And the second thing, whenever we burn fossil fuel, we create a lot of carbon dioxide, and that causes global warming. Irreversible change to our environment, pollution, air pollution, water pollution, these and that, all these irreversible effects that we are creating on our earth environment. We already see some of the effects of that, right? So we cannot continue the same way we are doing. But at the end of the day, for developing countries or any country, for their sustainable development, you see the demand, energy demand plays a very crucial role. You see this table, USA, they consume like 81,000 kilowatt hour per capita. Netherlands, Germany, China, even China nowadays are more than 20. These are probably 4 or 5 years old data, and India is hardly around 6,000 to 7,000. So to see India at a level of USA or European countries, we need a huge jump here, from 700, 800 watt per capita, and then we have to go almost 10 times of that, or even 20 times of that, right? So in India, we cannot really afford the thinking of like, okay, this much of carbon dioxide being generated, that much of things we are doing, harmful things we are doing for the environment and all these things. Those are luxury for us. We need something to survive. We need something for our sustainable growth, right? So we need, definitely we need energy, and we don't know how, right? So what are the challenges? As I said, fossil fuels are limited. Until now, we are only burning things, so they are limited, and it takes millions of years to being created. And if you have a rough estimation that okay, suppose we could not replace these fossil fuels, how long we can survive like this? Rough estimation. With today's rate, it will only survive up to 50 to 100 years. That means one or two more generations, right? That is also with current rate. And as I said, the rate is going to be increasing only because the population, industrialization, demand is, everything is increasing exponentially. You cannot simply think that today's rate will, after 50 years, we will be using the same rate, right? And environmental effect, of course. So the purpose of this talk, until now, whatever I said, is that we should have no doubt at this moment of time. We should not have no doubt that we need a sustainable, clean, renewable, low cost, and uniformly distributed alternative sources of energy. Why sustainable? Because we need it for a long time. Why clean? Because we have done enough damage to our environment. We cannot maintain the same thing in future. Why renewable? Renewable is the most cost-effective and affordable things, right? You can use it again and again and again and again, right? And of course, low cost. Why low cost? Because ultimately it's a private property, right? Suppose you, one of us, come up with a solution that okay, if you do this X, Y, Z, then all the problem will be solved. But only you have a thing will be that you have to pay the current bill, whatever you are paying, 10 times of that. I'm pretty sure no one will be interested. Does not matter how good or novel the concept is, right? Once you have to pay more, whatever you are paying now, people will not understand or cooperate, right? So it has to be a low cost commercial aspect, not only the science aspect. Commercial aspect has to be there. And why uniformly distributed? See, nowadays coal and oil, we have seen two world wars, right? Mainly because of these sources. Because Middle East has petroleum, America and China has coal, and Africa has these and that. So people start fighting with each other, right? That we also need it, but we don't have it. So let us take it from some other, right? So the sources we are aiming for future. If it is possible, the uniformly distributed sources will be the ideal. It should be available to everyone uniformly, so that nobody fights with any other, right? To some extent, at least. So if you summarize all these criteria, then you have to come up with the thing that only renewable sources can ultimately fulfill. Right? What kind of sources? These various renewable sources like wind, solar, biomass, hydro, geothermal, etc., etc. Now, that 4 or 5 point, if you see, none of these other alternative renewable sources have all those criteria. Only solar has all the. It is infinite, right? Solar is infinite. Sun is available for all, right? Sun is available for all, 24 hours, daytime, and it is, I mean, infinitely available. Once sun is not there, human civilization don't have to worry about it because civilization will also not be. The whole planet will die. It is absolutely free. You don't have to pay anything to sun to get the sunlight and all this. So you see the most potential one among this wind, solar, biomass, hydro, geothermal. If you summarize their plus and minus, you will see the most advantage, most promising one is the solar energy, right? Let us see what is the status of India in terms of energy roadmap. Where are we actually? Currently in India, 65% electricity is produced from thermal. We are still lagging a lot. We are still burning coals and all these things to generate almost 65% of our requirement. 22% hydroelectric power, our dam and all these things, right? 10% only from other sources like solar, wind, biomass. That is even after all these initial pushing from the government and all these things for last 4 5 years. 10% only, and 3% nuclear power, right? So definitely we are not in the right path. But what is the potential of India? What are the potential? You see, we are a very sun-rich country. Almost 300 clear sunny days are available per year to us. And if you estimate little bit that one day of the sunlight we receive on Gujarat or any other desert city, if you can convert 100% of it, that one day power supply should be good enough for the whole India for rest of the year. It is huge. It is enormous, right? But we are not utilizing it. We have a lot of, but we are not utilizing it. So that some kind of perceptions is required, some kind of awareness is required, some kind of pushing government and funding agencies are required. Fortunately, we do have some kind of initiation now. National Solar Mission and all these things have started, where government of India has targeted like 20,000 megawatt solar plant, which is basically 19 billion, 20 billion US dollar plan, and it is going in the right direction. But still now, we are heavily dependent on the existing technologies and thing, and which has a lot of limitations. So I will come to that later. So to summarize, why solar energy? Why green energy? Because of these problems we are facing and price factor. And solar energy has the best potential. Advantages are, of course, it is everlasting, renewable, clean source, and very, very intensely available to us. It is free, does not cause any pollution, and available fairly equal manner to everyone. It is not like that fossil fuels that some countries have it and some countries don't have it. And it is technologically very compatible with the existing industries. So here are the challenges. We are talking about so much potential as if solar can solve everything, but we don't see that every rooftop has a solar panel, right? So the problems are that I told you that if we can convert 100% of the efficiency of one day, the energy sources, the energy we are receiving from sun for one day, we can use the rest of the year. But what is the efficiency of the current technologies? It is hardly like 15%, 20%. So 80% conversion we cannot do. Forget about 100%. We can only convert the energy efficiently to electricity with our existing technologies is 90-20%. And what are the limitations? Theoretical limitations. We will come to that, all these things. Again, I will discuss in details. But just for information, only 30-31% can be converted. So it is not possible at all to utilize the 70%, the rest of the 70% of the solar energy. So only 30%, 31% we can utilize. There are some limitations. So that is one of the challenges. And the second thing, that whenever we talk about sun, it is a little different than the grid energy, right? When you burn fossil fuel, you have your control. But do we have control over sun's energy? No. The energy fluctuations are there. Someday it can be cloudy, someday it can be rainy. Winter season, the sun position got twisted. Summer we have higher intensity, right? So fluctuations will be there. And specifically daytime we have sun, nighttime we don't have sun, right? So some kind of storage also we need, that whenever we have that sunlight, intense sunlight available, we have to generate power, and then we have to store them, right? So the battery and other storage and their limitations also come into the challenging part of this particular technology. And some location dependency, like if you are desert, it's very good, but if you are mountain and forest or village areas, then installing those solar panels and these and that can cause some problems. So some kind of location dependency is also there. And most importantly, the power sector, the existing power sector, they are very, very mature. So, and this solar power sector will be comparatively newer one. So initially someone has to invest a lot, right? High initial investment are required, either from government side or private sector side, but somebody has to provide a lot of initial funding. So these are the challenges. That is why we don't see the solar photovoltaics yet everywhere in our daily life. But things are turning into right direction. People are understanding the need of the hour, and we are going towards those things when you will see that every bus and auto rickshaw and household, everywhere you will see one small solar panel is attached, maybe by 2030 or 2040. but we are definitely moving towards that. There is no other way. As I was saying, that this field is rapidly growing. You see, initially around 2000, there was hardly any country was producing in sun, and so global PV production was so low. And by 2010, it has increased exponentially. And even if you can gather the recent data by 2020, it will even be higher. The China and the Asian countries, India and Australia, they are really contributing a lot. Germany and all these things was there already, right? So this production, you see, the China has picked up, the European Union has picked up, the Asia Pacific has picked up. So everybody are following. The magnitude is different, but the trend, that slope is common for all. So all are investing now on solar power because the potentials are there, and you see the average sale price. The production and the power capacity is increasing, while the cost of the solar panels and PV materials are decreasing day by day. So this is a very good competition, right? The price is coming down, the production is going up. So that limitation I was talking about, that the customer has to pay the bill, that bill has to be lower than the existing market, right? So if these two things goes in this same fashion, after few years we can produce every watt of power maybe 1 rupees or 2 rupees, which will be lower than the current electricity bill, right? And right now at this moment, the solar power is like 5 rupees, 6 rupees or 10 rupees sometimes, so which is higher than the current rate, right? But things are going in a right direction. Okay, so now let us go towards the science side. So these were the introduction and things and why we. So now, what is the solar power? Solar power we are talking about. This kind of power, that input is the sun, right? So sun is releasing lot of energy in terms of photon, and somebody has to capture those photons and convert into other form of energy. Specifically, for us, it is electricity, but it can be converted in many other forms, right? So how the sun is creating those energies, right? So let us see that. Basically, if you see, the sun is a big ball of gases, 73% of hydrogen, 25% of helium, 2% of other gases like oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, etc., right? And it is burning, ever burning. And why it is burning? There is a continuous fusion reaction is going on. 4 hydrogen atom is converting into helium atoms, right? Helium atom. So in that process, this is the fusion process, they are releasing enormous amount of energy. And how much energy they are releasing? It is, if you know the Einstein's mass energy relation, then you will see E equal to mc square. If the mass is m, then the released energy is mc square equivalent, right? So every 4 hydrogen atom is converting into helium, so they are releasing this much of enormous amount of energy, right? So, and that is creating this kind of. If you plot the photon, the radiation spectrum of sun in terms of wavelength, you will see it's exactly matched like a black body radiation. So it starts almost from UV region 300 to something, and goes almost beyond 2000 nanometer and so, right? But please pay attention here. The most intense, the most significant part of solar radiation, if this is the radiation, you see from here to here, this is the most intense, right? Somewhere from 400 to 1000 or even lower than 1000. That covers almost 50, 60, 70% of the solar spectrum, right? And that part belongs to the visible region of the solar spectrum. So solar spectrum obviously has UV, visible, near IR, IR and beyond. But the most intense solar spectrum, the input that we are talking about, the sun energy solar spectrum we are talking about, the most intense part is the visible region, right? So from now onwards, please keep in mind that when we are talking about solar cells and all these things, we are basically targeting the photons available here in the visible region, because that is the most intense part. If you can absorb all the photons and convert, it is very good, but that is not possible. There are limitations, we will discuss about it. But even if there are limitations, we will always try to at least capture the photons available in the visible region. And one more thing, just to define the solar spectrum is critical for solar cell application, which is AR mass. If you see the sun position, sun location keeps on changing, right? Because Earth is moving. So at the daytime 6 a.m., 12 p.m. and 6 p.m., the sun's locations and angles are different. And depending on that, the photons has to travel a distance, right? From the sun to Earth's surface, because your solar panels and all these things will be on the Earth surface, right? And the sun is there. So if sun position is changing, how much those photon has to travel through the atmosphere, that will also define their intensity, that how many of such photons can reach to you of which wavelength, right? Because the scattering from the atmosphere, the absorption from moisture and all these things, clouds and other things will take into consideration. So in that way, we also define this travel path by AR mass, which is basically if this angle is theta, then 1 over cos theta. That means basically how far your photons has to travel through the atmosphere, right? And in principle, in most of the generic condition, we take the solar spectrum for AM 1.5 radiation. AM 1.5 radiation, which is kind of around 2 p.m. The location of the sun. That you can assume why it is, because that is kind of the average position of the sun, right? 12 p.m. intense, 6 p.m. The minimum, 6 a.m. the minimum. So 2 p.m. is kind of the middle position of all these things. So if you are testing your cells and all these things, so you should also test them at the average position, so that in other cases you will have a compatibility, right? So AM 1.5 spectrum is this yellow one, orange one. We consider this spectrum, and the intensity of that spectrum is mostly 100 milliwatt per centimeter square radiation. So two things remember, that the spectrum we took as input for solar radiation and all these things, which is AM 1.5, 100 milliwatt per centimeter square. And the region we target is the visible region from 400 to 809. So this is our input. Now, when we have that input, how many ways can we utilize those things, right? There are a couple of different ways we can really utilize sun. One is solar thermal, where we utilize the heat part of the sun, right? We create some generation, heating and cooling. There is photovoltaic, which is our primary topic here. There we create charge separation and charge movement, which is basically creating electricity. Right? And other things can be photochemical, like plants use sun rays to creating their nutrition and all these things. Right? That is photochemical. There also you do something, but that is more kind of chemical reaction you initiate with the help of solar energy. Right? Now, our primary topic, primary focus is the photovoltaics, because as I said, the fundamental or the most versatile form of energy is electricity. We are targeting the electricity here because we can utilize it for many other purposes, right? Right? So the photovoltaic part we will target here. Now, the input is sun, and the technique we are talking about solar photovoltaics. So now two things you have to understand: what is solar photovoltaics, and what are the things we require. And I'm telling you now that for photovoltaic applications, we need semiconductors. No other material can be applied for photovoltaic purpose. Why? We'll come to that. So two questions come in our mind: what is semiconductor, and why only semiconductor? Right? That two things you have to understand the whole photovoltaic process, formation of this process. Semiconductors are required. Why semiconductors are required, and what is semiconductor, that also you have to understand, right? And we have to also understand various fundamental properties of the semiconductors to understand the whole photovoltaic effect. What are the properties? There are many properties, but at least we should see this photovoltaic effect is an optoelectronic effect. There are involved optics and electronics, right? So we have to understand at least two kind of properties. One is electrical properties of semiconductors, like charge generation, recombination, charge transport, etc., etc., and the optical properties of semiconductor as well. How much it absorbs, what is absorption, what is transmission, what is reflection, right? So basically, these are the things we have to understand, because in a very rough way, you can visualize a solar cell made of semiconductor, where sunlight is coming and getting absorbed, and some kind of charge generation is happening, then they are moving inside the semiconductor, and then you are creating electricity at a load, outer load, right? So that is why These properties are so critical. Now, the first question, what is semiconductor and why we need semiconductor, right? So material, in terms of band gap, we can divide them in three different materials: metal, semiconductor, and insulator. Metal basically does not have any gap between conduction, and insulator has a very huge band gap, more than 3 and 5 electron volts. And semiconductor has a band gap of around 3 or below 3 electron volt. Now, because of this band gap, we have to use the semiconductor, because what I said, the input solar spectrum we are targeting is 400 to 800 nanometer. If you know the equation of converting photons into energy, h nu by lambda, hc by lambda, then you can see that 400 to 800 nanometer spectrum will give you energy around this 3 electron volt or below 3 electron volt. So we need to have one material which is capable to absorb that much of energy within the band gap of the material. That is why we need semiconductor. If we take metal will not be able to absorb anything because it does not have any gap. If we take insulators, the gap will be so high that 300 to 400 to 800 nanometer photons will not be capable to absorb by this material. Only the higher side, other sides will be absorbed. So only semiconductors has the capability to absorb that 300 to that 400 to 800 nanometer wavelength. That is why we need semiconductor, and that is why I am saying that understanding the fundamentals of semiconductor, specifically how they behave under light, that is our primary interest to understand today, right? So this is basically happening, right? So visible range 400 to 800 nanometer. Then we, if that photon is coming, that photon will be able to give its energy to these valence band electrons, and they will go to the conduction band, and they will leave a hole here. So this process is all total known as the electron hole pair generation, right? These photons, and this is a semiconductor. The band gap is equivalent to the energy of this photon. So the photon can excite one electron from the valence band to the conduction band, and it can create a electron hole pair, right? So photovoltaic conversion, the charge separation need to take place. So this is called the charge separation, right? So two energy states are required, and those two energy states are required at a height or at a distance such a way the energy available for the photon is capable to shift one electron hole between them, right? So that is why semiconductors are only capable, because they have band gap. It's not like that metal. They have band gap. They have two electronic states, and those electronic state gap is equivalent to the input energy that you want to capture, right? So the first thing from this slide, you must be understanding that the band gap is very critical, right? Because that is controlling how many photons will be capable of exciting such one electron hole pair. Let us see how this band gap forms, because then only we can play with the band gap, right? So basically, I will not go into the quantum mechanics and all these things. Maybe from the theory, we can explain a little bit with perturbation how this band gets formed, right? So suppose you have one positive nuclei and you have electrons circulating in a circular radius. So what Bohr gives, that the angular momentum of these electrons will be h by 2 pi. And if you compare their centrifugal forces and angular momentum, you will come up with this formula. We're not deriving it. So this formula will show that En, the energy of the electron of nth orbital, will be minus 13.6 by n square, inversely proportional to the n square in terms of electron volt. So if we take n equal to 1, we will have minus 13. If we are talking about n equal to 2 electrons, we will have an energy state of minus 3.4 electron volt, and similarly, right? So for one atom, I can say that energy states are discrete, like one and then another n equal to 1. Now, instead of one atom, when we are talking about a semiconductor, they have hundreds and millions of atoms vibrating to each other, right? And that vibration brings them sometimes closer, sometimes little far. So the interaction between the positive nuclei with other positive nuclei, the positive nuclei with negative electrons, and the negative electrons with other negative electrons is always going on. And those interaction, when we are talking about many body systems, many atom system, those interactions sometimes increasing their energy, sometimes attractive, sometimes repulsive. If it is positive versus positive, repulsive, negative versus negative, repulsive, but positive versus negative, attractive, right? So depending on those forces, these energy states now will change. And what will happen? We will have still discrete energy states, but they will be little bit part. They will be very close to each other, but not exactly same. Right? So in that case, instead of single discrete energy states, now we will have spread. Right? They will spread. And the outermost two cells, if we take, this spreading will minimize the gap between two these energy states. The more and more this spreading, more and more free atoms are there, it will perturb more and it will spread more. And more spreading means this gap will be decreasing. So this is basically the band. Right? This is basically the band. So how those atoms are situated inside the total material, the crystal structure, how they are vibrating, how their electron and nuclear clouds are interacting with each other, that will define their band gap, right? For semiconductors, somehow we have a balance around 1 to 3 electron volt. For metal, the spreading is so much interactions are there that these two conduction band and valence band spreading will merge with each other and there will be no gap. For insulator, those atoms are hardly interacting with each other, so this gap will be very high. Right. So this is the way we create band gap, generated band gap, and that is how the band gap varies from material to material. Right. So basically, from now onwards, we will talk about only valence band and conduction band, and instead of this spread, we will only talk about these edges, and we will draw the EC or conduction band energy like this and valence band energy like this. Please remember that. Okay. And one more thing here I would like to say that depending on the band gap, we can differentiate materials from metal, semiconductor, insulator. Similarly, for the semiconductor also, if we go little deeper into the quantum mechanics and all, the semiconductor also we can make two different. One is direct band gap, another is indirect band gap. Right? What is direct band gap? Here I showed you that these are straight lines, but basically if you see the location of the atoms and their crystal structure, they are random, right? So we hardly have this kind of straight lines, rather we have this kind of parabolic nature. Okay. So if the minimum of conduction band and maximum of conduction band situated exactly at the same location in a EK diagram, they are known as direct band gap. And what is the advantage of direct band gap? One electron can directly go from valence band to conduction band and come. Only one photon is capable of generating one electron nuclei. Combination is also easy. Example for such semiconductors are gallium arsenide, gallium nitride kind of thing. Now, there can be some asymmetry in the crystal structure which can cause that a shift between the minimum position of conduction band and maximum position of valence band. In that case, the transition of electron-hole pair is never a straight line because they are in a different k space, right? So these kind of materials are known as indirect band gap material, like silicon, germanium. So here, how we create an electron-hole pair? It goes from valence band to somewhere here by one photon, by absorbing one photon, and then it goes to the location of conduction band through a phonon vibration, right? So these are indirect way of transition. The example is silicon and germanium, and most surprisingly, although I was saying these are preferable for solar application, till now the most dominating material or commercially available solar panels are made of silicon. We'll see why, but this is one of the limitations of silicon also, because the absorption is tricky. We cannot absorb too many photons like this indirect phenomenon, right? So that also limits the solar cell efficiency for silicon. Anyway, so now we understand how band gap forms and how we differentiate material in terms of band gap, and then how we differentiate semiconductors in terms of band gap, and why semiconductors are so important and how we create electron hole pair in a semiconductor, right? Now, as I said, not only the absorption is important, transport thing is important, right? How the electron and hole moves through a semiconductor, that is also very, very important and very, very crucial. can basically control by doping, by making the semiconductors either hole rich or electron rich, right? So that we do by doping. I hope many of us knows the doping thing, so I will slightly touch upon these things. So we have basically intrinsic semiconductors and extrinsic semiconductor, right? So intrinsic semiconductors are those semiconductors that has the exactly equal amount of electron and hole pair. And when we generate electron hole pair, it goes straight like this, and we create one electron and one hole. They also create the number same because every electron, excited electron, leaves one. So those are the intrinsic semiconductors. But now, if we replace one silicon, for example, these are the silicon matrix. If we want to replace one silicon and we put either group 5 element or group 3 element, silicon is group 4 element, right? So if we put group 5 element like phosphorus or some other which are having one electron extra, they will donate that electron, right? So they will replace the silicon here in the covalent bond matrix and they will one electron. So the whole semiconductor will have one electron extra. So more and more such replacing will create more and more extra electron, right? So this is called endo. Now instead of group 5, if I put group 3 element like boron, which is having one electron less, so that will create one extra hole because this boron will take electron from some other bond to get saturated, to stabilize, right? So one hole will be created in that. So the more and more such boron side replace with silicon, so replace silicon with such boron, more and more holes we can create. So that becomes p-type semiconductor, right? But interestingly, these doped semiconductors are not actually positive or negative. They have extra electron and hole, but their charge will be balanced by the dopant, ionized dopant, right? So as a whole, the material is still neutral, but they have extra number of imbalance in either electron or hole, and depending on that, we can the mobility and many other things. I will come to that. Basically, we can tune the electronic property of the material. By doping. And these are the few formulas which shows the density of state.
Sorry to interrupt. I think your mic sometimes is not working. Sometimes your mic is not receiving your voice, I think. Please check, okay? Hello?
Maybe some connection issues might be.
Yes. Sometimes it's going, sometimes it's coming.
Okay. So basically, these formulas gives you how many such electronic states are available for the electrons and holes to sit, right? And these are charged particles, so they follows Fermi-Dirac statistics, of course, right? Fermi-Dirac distribution function and all these things. All these, yeah. Fermi-Dirac functions and all these things. So if we have this much of energy state and following these formulas, these electronic states can be occupied or not, then we can also calculate how many such electrons and holes we have, right? Basically, we can integrate these two formulas over a range of conduction. If we are talking about electrons, then within the conduction band. If we are talking about holes, then within the valence band, right? So if we do so, we can see, we can come up with these two very critical formulas, the total number of electrons and total numbers of holes we can have. Anyway, so these things you just keep in mind and try to read through some textbook or something if you have more interest. But these are some critical equations that we always need to calculate many other things in terms of semiconductors, how many carrier concentrations are there, how the transport properties is going to be like this and that, right? And from there, you see EF, one concept we have introduced, that is the Fermi level. What is that Fermi level? The Fermi level is basically gives you the probability function of 50% for occupancy of a energy state E, right? So if it equal to EF, you see this probability function becomes half, right? So Fermi level is basically the energy state which is having occupancy probability of 50%. So basically, this is your Fermi-Dirac statistics then, that at equal to absolute zero, we have nothing, no carrier can go beyond the Fermi level. But if we slowly increase the temperature, then charge carriers will get sufficient energy to cross the Fermi level, and more carriers will go for higher and higher temperature, right? Thermal energy will excite them. But then at the end of the day, they can only go and sit in the EC. They cannot stay. The fundamental things that I want to discuss here, no charge carriers can stay in between the band gap between the EC and EB, because there is actually no energy states available for this carrier to sit. So once they excite, they have to go into the valence band from valence band to conduction band. If the excitation is not sufficiently high enough to push those electrons to go beyond this excited the conduction band, then they will not get excited. Those will be forbidden kind of thing, right? So this is basically gives you the pictorial view that how things got excited, right? Now, in terms of thermal energy, it is possible, and in terms of photon energy also it is possible. All you have to make sure that the energy you are providing should be higher than this gap. So as I was saying, the doped material and all these things, ultimately number of P and number of N, whatever we have also the ionized Nd and Na, which are basically the donor and acceptor molecules, the dopant, phosphorus and boron we are talking about. So if you take the total amount of positive and negative charges for material, it will still come zero. So they are not positively charged. The concentration of electron and holes are different, but ultimately they are not charged particles, charged semiconductors, right? They are still charged neutral. And another thing you should understand here, for intrinsic semiconductor, as I said, the Fermi level has 50% occupancy, so the Fermi level will be exactly at the middle. But with N-type doping, we are creating more and more electron, so the probability of getting into the conduction band is higher, so the Fermi level should shift towards conduction band. Similarly, for P-type doping, we are creating more and more holes, so probability of getting holes into the valence band are higher, so the Fermi level should go towards the valence band. So these are the typical band diagram of an intrinsic semiconductor, N-type semiconductor and P-type semiconductor, right? Now, how these charge carriers move, that is also very critical and important thing. I would like to say a couple of slides on this. That these charge carriers can move basically in two ways. They are charged particles, so either we can utilize electric field, they will always feel the Coulomb force to move them, or they can diffuse on their own from one. If their motion is under electric field, we call it drift motion. Right? So you can visualize one unit of section like this, and the electrons of negative charges and hole of positive charges, and if the electric field is in this direction, the hole will move this direction, electrons will move this direction. So as a whole, with the motion of charged particles, we will have a net current this direction, right? So we can again have those equations like how much velocity can have for the electrons and holes. That depends on the mobility of electrons and holes, right? Mobility is basically drift velocity by the electric field. And if that is the case, the total current for the electrons, we can say that the charged particles, amount of charge E minus E, and the total number of electrons N and their velocity, that gives me the current density, right? And that velocity in terms of mobility, again I can write. Similarly, for holes motion, again the charged particles is positive E, total number of holes are P, and then their velocity. Again I can write in terms of their mobility. So the total current, drift current, can be expressed as this, right? Because the N will have another negative sign because the motion and the current directions are in opposite sign, opposite direction, right? So this is all about the drift velocity. Similarly, diffusion. What is diffusion? Diffusion motion is something like you can't control them. It's a thermodynamic motion, right? Suppose you are inside a room and you opened a scent bottle at a corner, right? And your friend is at the other corner. Initially, your friend cannot smell any scent, but after some time, she will also smell some scent, right? Because of the diffusion of the scent molecules from your area to the other corner. So this kind of motion is basically controlled by the concentration gradient. It always goes from higher concentration towards the lower concentration. So this motion does not depend on the electricity or electric field or any other forces. Rather, it goes for the concentration gradient, which is known as flux. here we can call it flux, right? So if again for such diffusion movement, so at t equal to 0 or t equal to 1, I can, if I say the concentration is very high at this x equal to 0 location, then with time it will spread. And with more time spent, it will spread more, and after infinite time, it will become uniformly available to everywhere. This is basically signifies to the diffusion motion. Like here also, you see at this location, all the particles are here. So the concentration is higher at this location and 0 at this location. So gradient is towards this side. Like with more and more time, more and particle goes. And if you sufficiently expands a lot of time, then all the molecules will be uniformly distributed. So electrons and holes also can have similar motion. Why it is so important, I will come to later, because when we call about photogeneration, that means we shine light and we create some localized high concentration of electron on hole at a location of the semiconductor where the photons being absorbed, right? And then those photogenerated electrons and holes can either have drift motion if there is electric field, or if there is nothing, also they will move through the diffusion moment, right? And this whole motion again can be derived in something like this. Basically the flux dn, the diffusion constant, and the derivation dn dx kind of thing, and the total current will be the drift plus diffusion, right? Okay, so these are the two ways it can move through the semiconductor, right? Now the next thing, so we understand the electron part. The next thing which is very critical is the absorption, because we are talking about solar cell, right? Solar cell is the device that absorbs the photons made of electricity. So we have to understand the absorption also, right? So what happens when light comes to any material? It can have three different phenomena. Either it can get reflected back from the surface, or it can just pass through the material, which is known as transmission. The reflection is the other one. Or the photons can go into the material and then absorb. These are the primary three things can happen when you put light into some material, right? For semiconductor also it is the same thing. Now for solar, so I can write if absorption is A, reflection is R, and transmission is T. I can write A plus R plus T equal to 100%. Right? Most of scattering and all these things we can just neglect, because they are basically very minimum in most of the cases if you are playing with thin film and smooth surfaces, right? So A plus R plus T equal to 100%. Now for solar cell, I don't even require R and T. I want my A is to be as high as possible, right? I want A to be 100%. So that is my ideal thing, right? It is not possible, but that is the ideal case we would like to have, and we will do many tricks to achieve that one. So what is absorption for semiconductor? As I said, suppose this is your matrix, you shine light, that photon must have sufficient energy to knock this electron to conduction band and make a hole here. So basically from band energy diagram, your photon energy EPH must be greater than the band gap EG. Then only it will shift one electron from valence band to conduction band, and you will create one electron hole pair. So this creation of electron hole pair, the root cause is the absorption, and this whole phenomenon is known as absorption. Now, if this EPH is much greater than EG, then what will happen? You will still create electrons, but that electron will go to much higher state instead of the coming to the EG. You just need this much of energy. Now you are providing too much energy. That excess energy will be thermal loss. Okay, so you will still get one electron hole pair, but that extra energy will be good for nothing. That will be a loss. And now, in case if EPH is less than EG, that means this electron hole pair can go somewhere here, not up to there. And as I said, there are no electronic state available between EC and EV in most of the cases, in ideal cases, right? So that transition cannot be happening. So any photon which is having less energy than the band gap, they will be transmitted. And any photon whose energy is more than or equal to EG, they will be absorbed. Now, if it is more than the excess energy, EPH minus EG will be the kinetic energy of the electron, and that will be lost as a heat energy later. right? So this is all about the absorption of semiconductor. Now, once they absorb, as I said, the absorption has another part of creation of electron. Every absorption is basically creating one electron hole. So how does that then the profile, right? So absorption must be similar to the rate of generation, because every absorption is creating, because the fundamental limitation is that if H must be greater than equal to Eg, so every absorption have to have create one electron hole pair. So the generation rate and the absorption rate should be very identical, right? So this is basically, if you consider the thickness at the initial surface at x equal to 0, you have the highest intensity, then the photons got absorbed, and the intensity get decayed into the material, and at that point it will be absorbed fully. So this is basically the absorption profile of any material which is having a absorption coefficient of alpha, right? So the generation, if we call x lambda GL, that should also have a very similar form of this kind of absorption, right? So basically you can write GL naught exponential minus alpha x, if the alpha is the absorption coefficient, right? So basically GL is the dNdt or dPdt, N and P are the electrons, right? And one more important parameter we should know here, that absorption length. What is absorption length? This is basically the inverse of alpha. So if you put x equal to 1 by x, you will see the whole thing is being absorbed, right? So the absorption length is basically indicates the minimum thickness that is required for sufficient absorption, right? This is very important for solar cell thin film applications, because we have to understand that what is the minimum thickness for a particular material you have to choose to have this efficient absorption, because the absorption is the first stage of photovoltaic conversion, right? So this is another again very important. Okay, now when I talk about this generation, after absorption this generation happens. Now if I remove the source of energy, that is the photon energy from the magnet, what will happen to this electron and hole? They are negative and positive charges, they are opposite charges, right? They will attract each other, right? So they will come back. This electron will release its energy and it will come back to the hole. That reverse process is known as recombination. So absorption, electron hole pair generation. Now we are talking about recombination, which is a basically reverse process. And for photovoltaic application, we always want absorption to be 100%, very efficient generation, but we don't want the recombination, because ultimate our target that once we generate electron and hole pair, we also want that electron to move and hole to move to the outer circuit to create the electricity and potential energy, right? The power generation. We really don't want that after generation of electron hole pairs, they should get an opportunity to come back and release their energy, right? So then the photovoltaic effect will die. So this recombination is very critical to understand, and we really don't want recombination to be happening inside the semiconductor for the photovoltaic application. I will come later that how we can mitigate these things, right? So basically that excited electrons release its energy back to the valence band, and this is known as the recombination. Now we can have three different kind of recombination. One, band to band recombination. It goes to the valence band to conduction band, it comes back directly to the valence band again. That is band to band recombination. But in many real situations, we have trace states in the films and devices. So it can also go directly to the conduction band and then recombine through some intermediate trace state. That is known as trap assisted recombination. And another recombination can be there, which is known as Auger recombination. If the semiconductor is very highly populated, highly doped, then we have a lot of electrons available in the conduction band already, lot of holes available in the valence band already. It's jam-packed. And then if we give little bit of extra energy to the generated electrons, they will collide with already existing electrons and they will disturb each other and they will lose some energy. That is also known as a kind of recombination, which is Auger recombination. This is basically, you can imagine that you are going in a bus, a jam-packed bus, and you are going in a bus where there is no one. Suppose there is a jerk and there is no one in front of you. What will happen? You will fall down. That's all, and the process will stop. But if it is a jam-packed bus, then you will push your front person he will probably push another person, and the reaction will go, and many of you get injured and lose some energy, right? So this second thing, the jam-packed condition where the electron have already overpopulated other electrons and they will have collisions and all these things, is known as the Auger recombination. But all these three things are not desired for photovoltaic application. We don't want them. Okay, some more fundamental things like band-to-band recombination, which is most dominant one, goes there, and if we give them sufficient time, they will come back again and recombine. Now, the lifetime becomes very critical here, right? That after excitation, how long this electron can stay in the conduction band before it can recombine, right? It is very critical. Why it is very critical? Because whatever time it gives us, within that time we have to take them out of the circuit, right? So lifetime here is very critical. So basically the lifetime we can define the number of excess electrons we generate by their recombination rate, right? So that is the lifetime, and these are typically in the nanoseconds or even for some material femtoseconds. And now, what I said, the generation is easier for direct band gap. Then the reverse process recombination is also easier for direct band gap. Now for silicon, this is one advantage now. The generation was little tricky for the indirect band gap. Now this recombination is also little tricky for semiconductor. That is why semiconductor has almost a microsecond of lifetime for this material, which is very favorable for solar applications, because most of the direct band gap materials, if you see, the lifetime in the nanosecond range, right? So microsecond range of lifetime gives you many other opportunities to play some tricks to take out those electrons and holes out of the circuit, right? Similarly, trap assisted also you can derive those things, and obviously it depends how many such trap states are available, how they are distributed, their distribution Gaussian or not, where exactly they are located from the band and valence band and all this. So that will control the trap assisted recombination. And similarly, other recombination also, that will depend, as I said, that at least one collision is required, right? So that means this kind of transition at least required three particles, either a hole, electron, or electron, a hole, right? So how many such electrons are there in square P, or how many holes are there, that will basically control the rate. The more and more populated conduction band and valence band are there, the probability of Auger recombination is very high. Usually it has been seen that more than 10 to the power 17 per centimeter cube carrier concentrations are required when these Auger recombinations start taking place, right? So that means I showed you that by controlling by the doping, you can control the concentration and transport properties and all this, but there is also limitation, right? You cannot go infinite doping. You cannot say that, okay, if doping is giving me advantages, let's keep doing that. No, there are limitations also, right? At least for photovoltaic application, once you reach 10 to the power 17 or so, you started creating other troubles, right? Now, these are about semiconductors. Now, when I talk about the solar cell, we cannot use a single semiconductor to make it efficient. As I said, see, these generations are taking place, and then generations are having some finite lifetime in the range of microsecond and nanosecond. Then somebody has to take care within that time period to take out those electrons and holes out of the circuit. So single junction devices will not do that. We need a PN junction. Now the next stage will be to understand the PN junction. So as I said, why we need a PN junction? I am telling you that to make an efficient solar cell, we need a PN junction. Absolutely need a PN junction. Then the first question we encounter that we need a semiconductor. Why a semiconductor? Now we know why semiconductor. Now I am telling you that semiconductors are the only first stage. Actually, I need a PN junction made of semiconductor. Then the question comes, why PN junction diode, right? Now, if you see the solar cell, the whole thing, if you summarize, as I said, the first stage is the electron hole pair generation. The second stage is the transport of the generated electron and holes, separation of the carriers before they recombine, right? Then only we can collect them. So the first task one, efficiently creating electron hole pair can be taken care by the semiconductors itself. But the task 2, the separation of charge carriers, that cannot be taken care by the semiconductors only. We need to have some energy asymmetry. We need to have some force acting on those charge carriers in the opposite direction to make them separated. And that asymmetry comes from p-n junction. Also how? Right. So basically, what is p-n junction? I hope many of you know that. So I could quickly summarize these things. So basically, p-n junction, we doped p-type semiconductor, n-type semiconductor, and we made a junction of them, right? N-type semiconductor, p-type semiconductor, and we made a junction. So before that, before the connection between this n and p, what we have? We have a Fermi level here for the n-type material, Fermi level here for the p-type material, right? Now, when we make a junction here, what happens? After the contact, we have higher concentration of electron this side, higher concentration of hole this side. So the first thing will start the diffusion motion due to the concentration gradient. Right. The electron will start diffusing from this to this, and the hole start diffusing from P to N. Right. But they are opposite charges. When they diffuse, they will meet each other and they will recombine. So at the very fine few layers of the junction, around the junction, they will all recombine. There will be no free electrons and holes, these red and white dots anymore. So what will be left over? The leftover will be the dopant. Plus dopants for the inside, minus dopant, ionized dopants, immobile, ionized. Why immobile? Immobile because they are replaced by the silicon, right? They replace the silicon. They are in the covalent bond now. They cannot move. They are ionized. So only those dopants will be left here, and every other electrons and holes will be recombined. So they are again opposite charge. They will create an electric field, and this electric field will stop further motion of these electrons, diffusion motion of electrons from N to P and P to N. Right. So this region is known as phase shift region, depletion region. Many names are there, right? And it will have an electric field, right? So this is the electric field. This is the built-in potential, which is now creating energy asymmetry between these two layers of semiconductors, right? Two layers of semiconductors, right? So that asymmetry, also in later section, that asymmetry will actually help you to separate those photo-generated minority carriers, electrons and holes, very rapidly to some extent. That is why we need this kind of p-n junction. We need an energy asymmetry for charge separation, and that asymmetry can be formulated or framed by making a p-n junction and creating a built-in electric field or built-in electric potential. So this depletion region, how much this electric field is generated, how far it is spreaded inside the region, all are very, very critical. So let us understand those factors on which this depletion region and these other things are depending. So basically, as I said, the Venn diagram was like this. Then when they are in contact, these Fermi levels has to be aligned. The Fermi level has to align because of the thermodynamic redistribution of charge carriers, right? Electrons are moving from other direction to other direction, holes are moving. So this thermodynamic redistribution will make it possible that these two Fermi levels will align. When that they two align, they basically bend the whole band diagram, right? The Fermi level becomes straight, and to maintain that, other bands become bended, right? The conduction band and valence band. Now from, so this is the depletion region. So this much of energy or electric field we have, this much of asymmetry we have now. So this is the asymmetry I was talking about, right? So if I put any electron here, now that electron will swiftly go to this side, right? If I put a hole here, that hole will swiftly go to this side, right? Because of this force, they will always feel the force. But if some electrons are far from this depletion region, they will not feel the force. If a hole far from the depletion region, they will not feel the force. So how we, and if the stiffness is much higher, the force will be higher, right? So how stiff is this? How much electric field is there, and how much it is depleted, how far the layers are depleted, are all very important. Because for solar cell, I want at every location I have an existing force that all my electrons and holes always fill this course, right? So that is not possible. But anyway, we can really control the depletion region with as well as the electric field by many other factors. Let us see what. So built-in potential basically, as I said, the electric field across the junction. Right? If you take all those equations like electric field, the Poisson's equation, and you solve that, you will come to this equation. Built-in potential, you can also call it V naught. It's basically the thermal energy available and the doping concentration in the acceptor and dopant. How much deep doping you have done, depending on that, the depletion built-in potential will increase, right? The more and more doping will create more and more built-in potential. Similarly, you can solve the same equation many more times and you will come with the expression that the depletion region, basically in the inside and P side, if you summarize, it will also depend on the dielectric constant and the built-in potential, but the inverse of the doping concentration, right? So they are like balancing each other. You can create very strong field, but within a small area. You can create a broad depletion region, but then you are losing the electric field on the forces. But anyway, you can always have a balance. The most important thing, the takeout point from here, that both these parameters we can control by controlling the doping concentration, right? So it is in our hand. So we can identify the materials which we want to utilize. Then we can identify the dopant which can be utilized for that purpose. Then we can calculate how much force and how much area is required. Depending on that, we can also calculate how much doping concentration we are going to do. Right? So these are in our hand. Okay, now now let us see, when we have a PN junction, what happens to the charge carriers. Right? Let us see at the equilibrium condition first. What is equilibrium condition? We are not exciting the semiconductor yet with the photon energy, so the semiconductor is under dark. Also the thermal energy and other electric field, everything, biasing, everything is switched off. Okay, so we are not exciting the PN junction at all. It is absolutely at equilibrium condition. No other excitations are there. Right? Now, this is my P side. This is my N side. So N side has a lot of electrons, right? And P side has a lot of holes. So what will happen with these electrons? These electrons will face a barrier here. They cannot move. Similarly, these holes will face a barrier at the built-in electric field or depletion region. They cannot move. So these majority carriers cannot move now. The majority carriers means electrons at the inside and holes at the P side. They cannot move. So the diffusion or drift both are almost zero. Although the concentration gradients are lower here and higher here, but because of this barrier, even the diffusion current will also be zero. And drift, forget about drift because the field is opposite direction, right? Similar for the hole. So diffusion and drift current both are zero. So what will happen? Only if there are some minority carriers like electrons in the P side, they can come to the inside, and if there are some holes in the inside, they can come to the, but minority carriers are negligible, specifically for those materials which are doped already, right? And we are at the equilibrium condition. So minority carriers motions are possible, but the number of minority carriers are so less, we can consider that motion as zero also, right? So basically, at equilibrium condition, without any excitation, the PN junction has no current flowing, right? No current flowing. The total current is zero. The total current due to electron, due to drift and diffusion, the diffusion and drift for the whole, everything is zero. Now, what happened if we bias? Right? The bias can be of two types: the forward biasing and reverse biasing. What is forward biasing? If we put positive terminal bias section with the P side and negative terminal with the N side, that was forward biasing. And if we put reverse terminals, the P with negative and N side with positive, that called reverse biasing. Right? Now, under forward biasing, what we do? we basically force those, by applying positive side here, those holes to go to the inside. We force the electrons by applying electric biasing to go to the inside to p side, right? So eventually, virtually, we can assume that we are basically minimizing this barrier height by external biases. How much minimizing? So if V naught was the built-in potential originally at the equilibrium, and VA, if that is the applied bias, then the equivalent barrier, now I can say the electric charge into V naught minus VA. So the more and more applied bias, ultimately if V naught equal to VA, then I can remove the barrier completely, right? And the reverse biasing will basically increase it. Reverse means negative. So they will attract those holes more towards the other side, right? They will not go the other side. So that means we can visualize that we are increasing the potential barrier by applying voltage. Okay? So this bend will more increase, right? So under forward bias, what I can say, slowly, more and more forward bias, the current will start increasing. And if V naught becomes VA, there is no barrier. So suddenly I will have a lot of current flow, right? Exponential and sudden onset at the A around V naught. But in a reverse bias, I am increasing the barrier more and more. So if under equilibrium condition there was no flow, under reverse bias also no flow. But now the stiffness will be much higher, right? So although there are very minimum number of minority carriers, but whatever minority carriers will be there, they will move because of the extra force. Only a very minor amount of drift current will reverse bias. So to summarize how the current voltage equation will look, right? So at V equal to 0, when there is no biasing, nothing, as I said, equilibrium condition, there will be no current. But at the forward bias, I increase the forward bias, I increase the forward bias, I am reducing the barrier, and I am having exponential current. Right? Under reverse bias, I am increasing the barrier, so no exponential increase in the current, only the saturated minority carrier will flow little bit of, right? Very minimum amount of current. So this will be the ideal IV characteristics of a PN junction under dark, under the influence of biasing only, right? Forward bias current exponential, reverse bias current constant and saturated. The total current will be this. In the real world, we see little bit of deviation because of some resistive losses, some heat effect, some trap, and this thermal generation in the reverse saturation we see, but mostly the form remains same. So please keep in mind your PN junction under dark looks like this, right? Now under light, as I said, the what is solar cell? Basically a PN junction semiconductor under light. So this whole spectrum will get shifted. Let us go to that. So finally, now we are going to talk about the PN junction under light, which is solar cell, right? The fundamental last thing I want to discuss. Now this is the same PN junction. Now instead of biasing, I am putting sunlight. The photons are coming, right? Now I can separate this whole PN junction into three regions. One region within the depletion region. Region 2s are the region neutral zone, which are not under the depletion region, not under the W, but within the diffusion length from the depletion region. And region 3, this and this, are the region which is beyond the diffusion length of the carriers from the depletion region, right? So what will happen when I shine light in zone 1, because of the depletion field, the built-in field, whatever carrier I generate, electron hole pair, they will quickly get dragged and drifted. These electrons will quickly come this side, these holes will quickly come this side and get accumulated, right? Right? Now, suppose for this zone 2, I shine light and I create some electrons here and more holes here. Similarly, here also more electrons here and some holes here in the valence band, right? Now, this zone 2 is within the depletion region, within the diffusion length of from the depletion region. What is diffusion length? LP and Ln for the hole and electron. That means by the thermal motion of the carriers, they can somehow randomly can go to the W. They are within that their velocity range, motion range, right? And once they reach here, immediately they will feel the force and they will get accumulated here. Similarly, the electrons, they are moving, and some of them reach to the W and immediately got trapped. So more number of electrons got accumulated here and more number of holes got accumulated here, right? So all the electrons and holes we generated in zone 1, they will definitely come, and the electrons and holes we created in zone 2, many of them will move ultimately towards W and get accumulated. But what will happen for the zone 3? They are far distance from the W, so all this carrier will get lost. So that is why I was saying the decreasing region I want over the whole thickness of my film, so that I have this film, or at least the device should be thick enough within this zone 1 and zone 2 so that I can accumulate all the charge carriers. Anyway, so what is happening ultimately? So under light, total positive charge in the p side and the negative charge in the inside has increased significantly because of the all the photo generated minority carrier, that is the electrons from the holes, they are accumulated down here, and the holes in the inside, they are accumulated here, right? So we have created a gradient of negative charges here and a gradient of positive charges here, right? So basically now this side is negative, this side is positive. Such accumulation of charges created the photovoltage, right? Photovoltage with terminal negative here and positive here, right? So ultimately, until now, my semiconductor was neutral, right? But now these photo-generated charge carriers and the asymmetric behavior of the band diagram accumulated them in P and N side, right? So now I have photovoltaic. This kind of generation of voltage is known as photovoltaic. Now, when I have this photovoltage, that voltage will force those charges intrinsically to move through the device, and that will create current also, right? I have a voltage, that means there are forces and current will flow. That flow, the flow of current, flow of charge carriers due to this photovoltaic is known as photocurrent. Now, so if I summarize now, initially I had this dark IV. Now under light, the whole thing will be shifted. And this IL is basically the photocurrent, and this voltage axis, what however I am generating, is the right. So basically the total current, I can write the diode current minus the IL current, whatever is generating, because of the minority carrier movement. So this is opposite to the IT, right? So this was my diode current expression. Now I subtract IL, so the total current looks like this. Now you pay attention. This is a unique feature for any electronic circuit. At the fourth quadrant, both the current and voltage are non-zero, and the current is negative and voltage is positive, right? So the power comes negative. This is the only one circuit where you can call the power comes negative. That means it does not consume power, it produces power. Any other circuit you call, the power is always positive, right? So this fourth quadrant, the PN junction under light at the fourth quadrant, they behave such a way that they produce power instead of consuming power. There they work as a solar cell. So this characteristics is typical characteristic of a solar cell under light for a semiconductor PN junction, right? So few things we define here to characterize our solar cell. This point, so basically this is the IV characteristic. So when the current becomes maximum and voltage becomes 0, that point is known as the short circuit current. When the current becomes 0, the voltage becomes highest, that is known as the open circuit voltage, VOC. And there is another important term, how much square kind of features we are getting, how good this outer bending is, that is known as fill factor, which is known as the ratio between the maximum power point where the product of V and I becomes maximum by the JSC into VOC. That gives you the squareness of the curve, right? And ultimately the conversion efficiency, which is our primary aim for solar cell, we can write like the output power by input power. Output power is the maximum VMJ, by input power is the light intensity, because for any circuit, the input, output by input is the power conversion efficiency. Here input is the sun and the output power is the electricity, right? So I am here again from this expression, I can route the short circuit into open circuit into field vector by the P in. And P in, if you remember, typically we take it AM 1.5 solar spectrum, which is 100 milliwatt per centimeter square, right? So this is how we define the solar cell efficiency. Now, last two things I will talk, that how we characterize them in our lab, right? Because you know, when we make solar cells in industry and then we sell, we pack them for commercial applications, we have to identify and we have to characterize them before selling them to make sure that each of the cells are accurate. And sometimes also by performance analysis and all these things, we came to know what are the problems having, which cells are bad, which cells are good. So in laboratory also, we have to make some arrangement to do that. It's not like that after making cell, we have to go outside for real life testing, right? We can do some simulation kind of thing. So basically two things we use, that solar IV testing and solar quantum efficiency testing, right? So this is the typical image of a laboratory or industry solar testing unit. There we use a lamp, mostly the halogen lamp or xenon arc lamp, which is having quite similar spectrum of sun. Then we keep our sample, the fabricated solar cells here, then some water circulation to keep the temperature fixed. And there are some automatic unit connected with computers and data acquisition system, which apply bias under the light and record this IV curve. And by recording this IV curve of each and every cell, we can generate a table like this, where we can test what is the open circuit voltage of each cell, what are the short circuit current of them, their maximum power points and their fill factors and their efficiency, how much resistance those cells have. And by characterizing each cell, we can generate similar table for each and every cell, and we identify the similar cells and we pack them. Right? So this is first thing, that to know their efficiency and to know their other electrical properties. And now another thing is very important, the quantum efficiency of the cells. Suppose the two similar cells, silicon cells, one is showing efficiency 80%, one is saying 16%. Then the question comes into mind, they are silicon, they are fabricated in the same day, why some is showing 16%, some are showing 8%, right? So that answer also we try to find out by analyzing their quantum efficiency, which is known as either QE or IQE, external quantum efficiency or internal quantum efficiency, right? So what is that basically? Basically, we investigate that when we shine light, per each photon, how many electrons and holes being generated at each wavelength and how many of them being collected, right? Generation is not the end of the game. We have to collect them, then only we can generate the power, right? So in between generation and collections, there can be many traps and recombination and this and that, where your performance can deviate. So that you have to understand. So how you do that? We again take a lamp of xenon arc lamp, which is similar to the sun. Then we use a monochromator to split each and every wavelength. Then we put a reference cell and our sample, right? And we compare their performance by data acquisition controller using a computer. So here we plot how much current we generate for each photon per each wavelength, right? And there we compare cell to cell that, okay, 400 nanometer wavelength is not acting properly for this cell, 600 nanometer wavelength is not properly acting for that cell, and percentage wise we can compare and understand what is going wrong, right? So these two parameters in our lab setup. In our lab also we have all this setup for research purpose. So IV solar testing and the quantum. Right? So okay, so that's all for today. So basically we talk about all the fundamentals of semiconductor, p-n junction, solar cells, how they behave under dark, how they behave under light, and how basically a p-n junction turns into a solar cell, and then we characterize them, right? So now next session I will show you what are the basic limitations of such p-n junction in terms of solar cell efficiency, and how we can mitigate theoretical limitations, and how people and scientists are coming up with new ideas to go beyond that. Right, so that we will discuss in tomorrow's class. So basically by tomorrow, please review all these things so that you have a clear fundamental idea that what is solar cell and what are the things that we are talking about, right? Because when I will talk about the emerging things and other things, these fundamental concepts will be very, very crucial. Okay, so that's all from my side. Professor Devashish, are you there?
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Dr. Kara. If participants have any question, you can ask Dr. Suprabhat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely here. And I already shared the test link as well as the feedback link for the day in your chat box. Please give the feedback and give your test in the meantime. So if you have any question, please ask Dr. Suprabhat. Suprabhat already clear all the basics. So all the basics for all participant class are being already. So it's very good talk, very nice talk. So if you any question, anything, I think there are a lot of students are there. They also can ask the question directly to sir. If you have any questions, don't scare and don't afraid. You will be very happy.
It is just a common interaction. Yeah.
So as I told before to everyone, tomorrow our session will start at 10:30 a.m. Okay. Suprabhat, if you please note down these things also. Suprabhat. Yeah, we will start at 10:30 instead of 9:30. Okay.
Okay. The link and everything will be same, right?
Yeah, everything is same. Just time you only change.
Okay, so tomorrow we'll talk about the quantum dot solar cells, nanostructure, more like state of art things. But I would be happy that if you guys come up with a better, clear idea tomorrow, huh?
Okay. That we can do. I think some of them at least they will follow this.
Yes.
Okay, I think there are no questions. Or if there are no questions, then we can close the session. We will not.
If somebody has any other question, you can even shoot me an email. Okay, don't get hesitate.
Yeah, they can ask
send me an
tomorrow
email.
also.
You can ask tomorrow also. Yes.
He is available next 2 days. So in next 2 days you can ask him also. After that you can mail him also. That is not issue. Okay, so thank you, Suprabhat. I think all of them they have they don't have any questions. So thank you, Suprabhat. Thank you all the participants.